Okay, hi everybody. I'm Mercury Black, and I'm here today with Dr. Oren Amitay. And some people will remember you from your talks with Andrew. We still have some viewers from back then, but for others who haven't heard of you, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. Well, I am a clinical psychologist in Toronto, Canada, and I also lecture at the university, Ryerson University, as a sessional faculty. I've been there, or sessional lecturer. I've been there for almost 20 years, and I've taught at 5 different universities altogether. Never went full professor route because I prefer to do my clinical work and I prefer to teach rather than spending most of the time doing research. So I teach about research, I keep up to date and everything, but if I were to go the tenured faculty route, I would be spending most of my time doing administrative work and doing research. So I've chosen this path in life, and I've been very vocal about certain topics that I'm quite aware of as someone who's taught about it and worked in these fields or with these problems or issues as a psychologist. So my being vocal has earned me many people who appreciate my support, but has also earned me many targets on my back. And one of those things that, one of the results is that my organization, I have to be careful because people confuse the two. I am registered with a college, a licensing board, that's the College of Psychologists of Ontario, but there's also an organization called the Ontario Psychological Association, which is a volunteer group. It's a group of professionals, and if you want to have insurance, which you have to have if you want to be a psychologist, it's like the equivalent of malpractice insurance, you have to belong to either the Ontario or the Canadian Psychological Association. And I've been with the Ontario Psychological Association since I was a grad student because it was more local. My provincial matters are, maybe unique to that province versus the CPA, the Canadian Psychological Association. So I've been with them for many years. I've been on the board of directors a number of years ago as the Toronto rep. And then last year, around this time actually, I think it was maybe May or June, they banned me for life basically because I was speaking out about certain issues. And I was very vocal. They claimed that I was not being, let's say, I wasn't acting in accord with how they would like us to conduct ourselves. And I understand that. I was quite vocal. But in reality, and they actually did this on the listserv, they claimed to members because I had put out an article in the Post Millennial talking about what had happened with me, how I was banned for life from the OPA. And so some members were asking about this, and the board members were claiming, no, he left on his own accord, we didn't stop him, etc. And even somebody who didn't like me, they reached out to me. I gave them the emails, at least my side of the emails. I didn't want to show the boards. And it clearly showed that I said to them, look, of course I want to come back. I want to be part of the listserv. I want to be able to do all these things. I said, however, the most important thing is for me to be able to connect with my colleagues so that if I have someone reaching out to me saying, I need help for this or this issue, do you know somebody, right? I could refer them to them. Right. This is a long-winded way, but I want anyone who's watching, I want them to understand where I come from and how how I got to where I got. So good and bad. So basically, the emails clearly showed that I was saying to them, I want to be an active member. I want to be able to do what I was doing, participate on the listserv and so on. I said, however, if I ever speak out of turn, you can easily get rid of me just like you did before, 3 or 4 times. And B, I said, if you don't want me on the listserv, I said, fine, keep me as a member just so that if I have someone who's reaching out to me and I can't be the best person for them, maybe because of location, time, or expertise, I can reach out to my colleagues directly and find someone who's available. And they refused. And they claimed, they made different claims, and the emails clearly showed what I was willing to do. And that willingness was, I'll shut my mouth, just let me refer patients to the right person, because as a psychologist, that's my goal, to help people. If I'm not the best person, if I can direct somebody to that better person, then I'd want to do that. They said, no, I don't know if you'll put in the links, but my article, they can just Google telling the truth on trans issues and my name, and you'll get it. The Post Millennial, you'll see the article. I think it was October.
Yeah, after we're done here, just send me any links that you want in the description, and I'll put them in when it goes up. Okay. Now, we can go 2 ways. 2 questions came to mind with that. However, you could also skip those questions and we could dive right into how people can handle everything going on currently with quarantine. But if you wanted to respond to either of these, one question was why you chose, like why you're choosing to focus more on an active practice than research. Is that just because you prefer the actual interaction with people? And the other question was what, and again, especially this one, if you're tired of talking about it, that's fine. But if you want to, I'm curious to hear specifically what opinions it was you had that were so outrageous.
Okay, I think I can talk about both. I think they're both important, and then we can delve into, you know, the mental health aspects.
Great.
So yes, so as you say, yeah, I prefer interacting with people, whether it's as a practitioner or as an instructor. You know, a lot of professors, they see teaching as a necessary evil. They don't want to teach; they have to as part of their job. And I see it as the best part of the job. I love to teach. I've been teaching for many, many years in different capacities, 20 years at the university level, and in different capacities since I was like a teenager. So, you know, my grandmother was a teacher, my mom was a teacher for a little while. And my father was a teacher later in life. So it's something that I love to do. And again, being a full-time faculty, you are spending far less time teaching and far more time doing other stuff. So that was one part. And the other part was I'm jaded about research because you know, there's a lot of good research out there. And every time there is good research, I will promote the heck out of it because I want people to see it. How do we gain knowledge? How do we promote knowledge, but with research? So I think it's very important. The only problem is I've seen too many examples of, especially in the field of psychology, but in any social science, the facts and evidence being, let's say, deprioritized, and other factors are involved, whether it's a person's personal ideology, whether it's the university's bent, whatever it is, it's not as pure as people would like to think. Just because it's peer reviewed doesn't mean it's good. So I kind of became a bit cynical in that regard. So, okay. And the second question about what did I say? Well, again, I will be the first to admit that my tone on the listserv was harsh at times. It was blunt. All right. If anyone sees my Facebook pages, they'll see I'm just very, I can be very tactful, very diplomatic, very civil. I try to be. But when I'm dealing with people who are not acting in good faith, when they make up stuff, and I'm not just talking about, you know, nobody's on the internet. I'm not talking about people I don't know, an egg on Twitter. I'm talking about colleagues. When they're promoting falsehoods, when they're saying things that are just plain factually incorrect, when they make false allegations about my motives. All right, I had people saying, you know, they questioning aloud on the listserv, now basically saying, I'm worried about your patients. If this is the belief system you have or the attitudes you have, God forbid you should be seeing anybody. So when people come at me like that, I'm going to put the gloves down. I'm going to say, let's have at it. But the thing that I always said was, and I said this many times, I said this in my videos, I've said it in everything I've written, or many things I've written, I said, just show me where I said what you claim I said, or show me any evidence that my motive is what you are claiming. And nobody's ever been able to do that, not once. And it's very frustrating. And again, if it's somebody on Twitter who's just trying to troll me, I don't care. If it's a colleague who's outright said this thing, whether it's directly on the listserv or privately back channel, I am going to be more direct and blunt. So that was the tone that they claimed was so egregious. But the reality is, I never once made any false allegations about anybody. I never impugned their motives. I never said they said what they didn't say. Right? The one time somebody said back channel, they said something to me, I misread it, and I kind of came at them because the way I misread it, it was very easy to misread, by the way, was extremely rude. And as soon as they told me, because they were being sarcastic, they were being sarcastic, right? And I didn't know that, so it was quite clear. You know, when I heard what they were saying, I was, oh, I understand what they're saying. But at first, it seemed like they were just being insulting to me. And as soon as they said that, I said, oh my goodness, I wrote back to them. I said, I'm so sorry. I even went on the listserv. I even said, without saying who this person was, I said, I misunderstood what they were saying. And as soon as I realized that, I said, oh my, I'm so sorry. So I didn't have to tell everybody that, but I was saying, yeah, I made one mistake and I addressed it right away. So you know, it was very, what's the right word here? Hypocritical, let's say, where people would come in and they would just come out of the blue and say, hey, everybody, you're being a bit, no, they were saying I was being rude and let's say hurtful. And they would let the people who were actually saying dishonest and inaccurate things, they let them slide. they would address me directly. And I say to them, I say, are you not going to call out your friend or colleague for doing something far worse than you're saying about me? I said, I'm just dealing with evidence. You might not like the facts that I'm describing, but I'm not, again, directly calling somebody, names or questioning their motives. Actually, sorry, I did sometimes question motives when they would say things that are factually incorrect. I would call them out on it. I would say, here's why you're wrong, and show me where I'm wrong. And they wouldn't do it. They'd just be silent. I would question their motives then. What is your point if you're not going to engage in a good faith discussion? So yes, that's when I did question motives, but only based on their interaction with me rather than their clinical practice or their, the theories on stuff. So anyway, so what I was saying that was so terrible for a number of years, and this is, if anyone ever wants to, I'll give you the links. I've got like a multi-page document where I show everything that happened with me in the listserv starting about 3 years ago. It was when Jordan Peterson basically came on the scene. Now I'm going to get my math wrong on this. I think it was 2017. It was maybe October 2017, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, October 2017. And when he first came out and was talking about, pronouns and where Canada was going and so on, one of our colleagues said, hey, look at this. There's a psychologist in the news. That's good because we're trying to promote ourselves. We get lost in the shuffle sometimes because there's other types of healthcare workers. So, anytime a psychologist in the news, that's great. And I used to be in the news all the time. I was giving about, on average, 4 to 6 interviews a week. TV, radio, newspapers. It was very common. And that when Googles my name, if anyone checks, I'm blocked on Twitter for life. I'm banned for life, okay, for the same purposes, different reasons, same theme. But if anyone looks at any of my videos, appearances, or whatever, and takes the full context, and I've spoken a lot, you will never find anything I've ever said that's hurtful, that's hateful or inaccurate. The only inaccuracy might be I might get a date wrong or a percentage wrong. But as far as the points I'm promoting, it's all based on science, evidence, clinical experience, speaking to very many people in the field. That's what it's based on. So, when Jordan Peterson came on the scene, I initially said that he was going about it wrong. I understood the point he was making, but he was not very well polished. He was used to talking to a bunch of, students, undergrad, graduate, colleagues, people who could process things properly, not recognizing that a lot of people were hearing what they wanted to hear. So he's obviously polished that message over the years, and he learned how to say, look, I'm not transphobic. This is not a knock against trans people. This is the problem. And then he talked about free speech and, let's say the government dictating what we can and cannot say, stuff like that. So when that first came out and one of my colleagues mentioned that, somebody came on the board, someone came on the listserv and said, we're not happy about this. This man is, I forget the word they used. They didn't say evil, but they said some pretty nasty things about him, right? And these are psychologists. And somebody even put Jordan Peterson should not be allowed to speak on these issues. They were deplatforming. A psychologist was deplatforming another psychologist because they didn't like what he had to say. And nothing he said about these issues was factually wrong. They just didn't like it. So that's how it all started a few years ago. And then as I got immersed in this, now I've been teaching about this for almost 20 years, but politically speaking, I was getting more and more vocal because I saw more and more changes, whether it was in government, whether it was about how people were teaching, what they were teaching, whether it was about what students had to do to maintain their role at university, like they had to make pledges to things, whether it was lawyers having to make pledges to diversity. And I'm not just talking about trans issues. I'm talking about, the trans issue is only one part of the bigger picture, right? Progressiveness, being woke, and so on. So I saw this happening, and at the same time, because I was vocal, I was getting so many emails and texts and calls from around the world, literally around the world, where people were saying either, and again, whether we're talking about the trans issue or the broader issue of wokeness, but I was getting so many people sending me things, and they were showing me screenshots, they were sending me documents, they were showing me things that could easily be verified as true, where the indoctrination to all these different people in all these different fields was becoming clearer and clearer. And when it came to trans issues or gender issues, that was one of the most striking, let's say, developments that we were seeing, bad developments, because a lot of people were being taught things that just had no merit. There was no basis in reality. These were just ideologies. So I kept posting links to these articles or stories or papers to my colleagues. And I said, look, this is what's happening, and it's only getting worse. And what Dr. Peterson had predicted is happening. And on top of that, the worst calls and emails and texts that I was getting, and I got literally hundreds of them, was from parents or family members of young or usually teenagers, early 20s, people who suddenly said they were transgender when there was never any evidence about this. And I spoke to these people. I'll tell you right now, a few of them I could tell were hateful. All right, they were transphobic or trans negative. Maybe if their kid had told them they were gay, they might have been equally, opposed to it. But the vast majority were simply good parents or family members, loving family members who said our child or family member was in distress and we wanted to get them help. And what they were being told and where they were being directed and what ended up happening was basically tearing the family apart. It was alienating the child. It was making the child's dysphoria, gender dysphoria or distress even worse. And it's just sent them on a one-way course to what was not the right thing for them. Now, there may be some of those people may benefit from what they ended up doing, whether it was hormone treatment or surgeries. But we know for a fact that most people, if you let them be, right, they're going to eventually say, I'm not trans. I don't know what I was thinking. My body is the correct body. I'm okay. But what I saw was more and more, and I'm not going to get into this because it would take forever, but there's a lot of evidence, and I've given lots of videos, and I've spoken to experts, where I just saw that more and more certain quarters of people were trying to get us to accept from an earlier and earlier age that if a child says, I'm a boy when they're really biologically a girl, that's what we should accept, and that we should do everything in our power to help them in that pathway, even though the stats show up to 94% of those kids will eventually go, no, that's not me. I'm actually a boy or a girl, whatever their biological sex is, right? So I was saying to my colleagues, I said, what's going on here? The kind of non-factual or non-empirically supported phenomena that is being promoted as fact again in the government, in schools, in policies everywhere. I said, as psychologists, we need to stand up and say, no. Here's the facts. Here's the things we think we know. Here's what we would like to happen, but we need to be clear on what each one of these factors is. And that's what I got shut down for, because I was very vocal and nobody was supporting me. The one time, just so you know, one of the board members said, well, why don't you make your own special group? You can do a task force. I was saying, great. So I was going to set up a task force where we could then come and say, we've done all the work on this. Here's our position. And we represent the Ontario Psychological Association. We're a task force within it. And as soon as I was going to do that, I put out these messages to recruit people, and I found out that they were blocking my messages. I couldn't send messages out. So, hey, gather anybody that you want. We just won't let you, collect them. This was before I got banned. This was just, they blocked me. And anyway, so this is the kind of shenanigans that went on. So that's the story behind it.
And so for anyone who's hearing your story for the first time and is maybe more on the left side and is wondering like, hey, is this guy a transphobe? That's the purpose of this question, is to get to the heart of it. So to set aside all the politics, to set aside the current, like the aspect of it sort of being promoted right now and perhaps pushing people into it that will regret it. And if we accepted that the majority of young people eventually become comfortable with their body, just to get to the heart of it, I'll say, for the small percentage that don't outgrow it, for if there was a transgender individual, that we're not talking about a child, they're an adult, they're one of the small percentage that never outgrew it. And if they were not involved in anything political, we're talking about just a person, how would you feel about that trans person?
Well, I mean, I would feel any trans person, okay, however they got to it, live and let live. I've got no problem with that. I've got no problem using any pronouns people want, as long as they're legitimate, like real pronouns. I'm not going to use made up terms because that just doesn't make sense. And I've just so your listeners know, I've treated a number of people who have trans issues, gender issues, sexual orientation, sexual identity. Like, that's a big part of my practice, sexuality. I've had a number of trans students, or non-gender non-conforming, or atypical, non-stereotypical students and patients. My family, again, your listeners wouldn't know this, but I come from an extremely liberal family. My mother opened up Canada's first sex store. So being raised in that environment, in the early 1970s, having a gay brother and a gay sister, a number of gay family members. I don't think we have any trans family members, but my oldest daughter, a number of her friends are transgender or gender non-binary or non-binary gender. And they've come to our house all the time. They've slept over. They're welcome. Whatever pronouns they want us to use, we use. And so, anyone who tries to smear me as anything other than this, good luck in finding any evidence to this, to portray me that way. And I should stress that, like my other colleagues who have been tarnished as, hateful transphobic people, I believe that for a tiny, tiny percentage of people, hormonal or surgical treatments is the only thing that's going to alleviate their dysphoria. And if we can provide it, I believe that they should do it, as long as they're older. They're old enough to make that decision. At what age is that? That's tricky. I think the early 20s is fine. Some people say 25. I would think 21 would be, I think, safe enough. And I understand that's a long ways to wait for people if they feel that they have to do this, but far better, to have enough time to make the right decision. And I'll tell you right now, there are laws in the states I know, or states that are trying to change laws so that any doctor who does do any of these types of treatments could be arrested. I wouldn't say that. I would say if they do it prematurely, yes, right, that you shouldn't suppress a child's hormones when they're 8 years old. But if they're a teenager and it's clear that since they were a young child, they were always dysphoric, or they always felt like they were that they wanted to be the other sex, and it persisted through puberty, and they've shown that they've got the mental capability, to know what they're doing, to make these decisions. In those rare cases as well, if they're a tiny, tiny proportion of the tiny, tiny people who would require it, I would say we shouldn't by law prevent doctors if they've done their due diligence, and that's the key. If they've truly gone through enough treatment and assessment, evaluation, and really discussed it properly, then I'd be okay with them, maybe doing early interventions. In the rarest of cases. In other cases, they should wait till they're adults. I just don't think that we should bar all treatments by law. So anyway, that's where I stand. And if someone can find something wrong with that, good luck to you.
Yeah, and I phrased it as a question because I didn't want to put words in your mouth. But my impression, it's been a while since I've watched your videos. I don't think your YouTube channel's been active lately.
No, not for quite some time, no.
But back when I did first go through your stuff, my impression of you was that you were the exact opposite of transphobic, that you were very supportive of trans people, that just like it's a very small minority of people who are trans, it's a small minority of people who have worked to support and help trans people. And it seems like there would be very few people who in the world who have devoted more energy than you towards genuinely helping. And it seems even all the political stuff and bringing up facts that aren't popular, it seems to me is coming from a place of wanting to help trans people properly and not to be giving them bad advice, bad treatment, or to be confusing issues or using them for political ends.
Well, exactly. And I'm glad that you did ask the question, because I've given these talks many times and I forget, if we don't give the proper setup, if people don't know all the context, it is very easy to make the wrong impression. So yeah, I do appreciate you asking that. And yes, I just want people, whether they're trans, not trans, gay, it doesn't matter what the issue is. I just want the proper help for people. And I want it to be done. I want it to be done properly. I want the best practices. And as I said, the top people in the world who are smeared as transphobic, Dr. Blanchard, Dr. Bailey, Dr. Zucker, Lisa Littman. Actually, I don't want to speak for Lisa Littman because I don't know where she stands, okay? But these other three names I just mentioned and a few others, they have clearly said that in cases where surgery or hormones is the only way to alleviate dysphoria and all the distress around being trans, they are all supporting it. And those three people, Bailey less so, but Blanchard and Zucker, they have written so many papers in support of trans people, yet they are considered the most transphobic on the planet by certain activists. And that word gets spread and people don't want to hear the truth. So, anytime somebody comes out and speaks out against the trans orthodoxy or whatever the orthodoxy is, you risk your career, your reputation, your livelihood, your name. And I've had trans activists write to my college a number of times. They've reached out to my university. They've tried to get me, they've reached out to radio and TV stations. They're trying to silence me. And, and that's a problem. And if I was hateful and I was promoting lies, false information and stuff like that, fine, then I would deserve that. But that's not what happened. So there we are.
It's unfortunate they don't put that energy into directly helping trans individuals the way you've spent so much time doing.
Well, exactly. And also, one of the things that just, again, I'm kind of, there's two different competing forces. The one part is this idea of wanting to help people, whatever their issue is, finding the best thing. But then the other one is just also being able to see what's going on in society, whether it's political, academic, societal, cultural, whatever it is. And when seeing a certain problem, and it seems so obvious to me, and it's the kind of problem that Jordan Peterson pointed out years ago, and I've been seeing as well, I've been promoting for years also, it's frustrating when it's a little bit frustrating when the general public doesn't see it. It's extremely frustrating when professionals who should be better equipped mentally and psychologically can't see it or aren't able to handle it. And I'll tell you right now, I got to say this, Mercury, and I wish I could post, I'm not doing it because of ethics. I've posted all my emails because that's fine. And you can kind of understand, you get the context from my emails, but I wish you could see the emails of some of my colleagues where their responses, clutching the pearls, saying all the same stuff that you see on Twitter from anonymous 12-year-old kids. I had adult psychologists saying the same stuff, okay? And it just blew my mind.
Okay, and is it with your, like with your peers, with other psychologists? And I know, like, I'm asking for conjecture here that you don't actually know, but does it seem that these are actually deeply held convictions on their part, or are they just looking for some sort of social praise?
When we were talking on the listserv, I do believe that for many of them, it was their conviction because a lot of them are younger. So, and I know what university or universities they went to, and those universities were promoting certain beliefs. So as undergrads or grad students, that's all they learned. And they weren't taught critical thinking. We talk about in academia all the time. We say critical thinking, but we're not actually taught it. I teach it to my students, but a lot aren't. So they were taught a certain narrative, and they accept it, and it's become so ingrained. And here's the biggest problem: because they want to help others, good for them. Who doesn't, right? They were taught that if they go this way, it's helping. If they say or do this, going against the narrative, it's hurtful, it's harmful. And so that's all they ever thought about. So they became so ingrained in this belief system and believing that if they go against it, they're going to be hurting other people. So that's the most of them. Some of them, I think, are doing it for, cachet, but for the most part, I think they really do believe it. And I'll tell you right now, almost everybody who agreed with me, they would do it back channel because they saw what happened. When I mentioned some of the names, Dr. Zucker, I won't go into the whole story, but people can Google Ken Zucker, Z-U-C-K-E-R, and just they should type in Jesse Singal, S-I-N-G-A-L, a reporter or a science writer, because he did 2 great articles on Ken Zucker's story. But Ken Zucker, one of the top psychologists, one of the top experts in the field of transgender issues, at one time was running one of only 2 clinics in the entire world, right? The expert, he got fired like that on false pretenses. He was vindicated when he took them to court. They settled out of court, the organization that fired him, but it just lies were promoted, and it was proven. And Jesse Singal was the person who helped expose that. So when people see that the top person in the field is just as vulnerable as someone who's just beginning, people learn really quickly, shut up, don't say anything. So many people back channel were emailing me. They were almost all older, and they all said, good for you. Thank you so much. You're doing the right thing. I didn't know this was happening, and so on. And almost none of them would publicly, and by public, I mean on the listserv, say the same thing. A few did, most didn't, because they didn't want all their colleagues to come down on them. And then younger ones, there were a few younger ones, but they said, look, this is suicide. If I were to speak out, I would never, I'm still trying to get a job. Nobody would hire me if they thought I don't have the right mindset. So that's the problem. And in any field, whether it's psychology or medicine or academia, or literature, whatever the field happens to be, people assume that when we say there's consensus, that means that everybody agrees. No, when there's consensus, what it usually means is a small group of people with specific expertise in this area, they have arrived at this belief, okay, and it may be validated or not, who knows? And then everybody else who they have other areas of expertise and they know a little bit about this stuff, they say, well, if my colleagues who know this stuff the best are saying this, then that's probably the line that I should take. That's what usually happens in any field. It's not like we all take a vote and go, yes, we all agree on this. We're all experts. We've all done the work on this. And that's happened with trans issues, where people are saying all the time that this hateful Dr. Blanchard and Dr. Bailey, the models that they are promoting are antiquated. They've been proven wrong. Nobody believes in them anymore. And nothing can be further from the truth. I'm part of various organizations involved in sex, in gender, in research, in academia, and psychology. I'm part of all these groups. And it's very clear that, no, it's not that consensus is that these guys are wrong. They have their models, Zucker and Blanchard's model hasn't been disproved at all. It's not perfect. There are problems with it, but it hasn't been disproved. But if you just Google, Ray Blanchard, transgender, you're going to see the same narrative by thousands and thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands. But it's wrong. They're wrong.
I find all of this very strange because for myself, it's been over a decade now since I've stepped out of society, and like I barely ever leave my property at all. And yeah, so when I left the world, it wasn't like this. Everything involved with the SJWs has come out since then, and I've never met anyone who thinks that way, and I haven't been out in public much at all, like for over a decade now. So sometimes hearing about all this, and as you were talking about it, I just had a big wave of it feeling very, very surreal to me, what you were describing. That especially, there's so many real problems in the world, and to think that you and Peterson and all these people are wasting your time dealing with this, let alone all the students, wasting so much time in this one area of cancel culture when they could be discovering, building, creating all kinds of things. The hours put into protests could be spent helping actual people, like people with mental illnesses, trans people, homeless people. There's tons of people who need help right now. There's so much to do, and we seem to be, like, it just seems like a real brain drain to me that we're flushing a lot of the intellectual work hours that our population is doing down the toilet right now.
Yeah, I believe that is true, and social media is a big culprit. And social media can be excellent. It can be very helpful. It connects us, it provides information, but it's also a platform on which people can do everything that you just said. It's very easy to do, and it's safe from the comfort of your own anonymity and home. So yeah, I agree with you. One thing that you were saying, I wanted to build on that, but I lost it. It was about the cancel culture, but I just lost it. Sorry. Okay.
Maybe about the opportunity of what could be done with that effort instead of.
Oh yes, what I was going to say. No, I remember what you were saying about how this was alien to you. Okay. The fact is, many people ask me. They say, "Why are you so vocal about this?" They say, because it's alien to them as well. They don't see it in their face. And if it were only on campus, if that were it, then I would say, okay, well, I got to do my advocacy work on campus only. But the reality is it starts on campus, not everything, but many things starts on campus, and then it grows. And that's why I was saying, I was getting messages around the world of people saying, like, I am a teacher, or I'm training to be a teacher. I'm at a conference right now, and look at what they're making us teach. And they take pictures of this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just bad ideology. And this is, again, it spreads. And unless you're immersed in it, you don't know what's happening. And so people think it's just this tiny little corner of the world. Why are we worrying about this? But there's two things. Like, as I said, not only am I getting messages around the world from people who are saying this is the kind of garbage that's being promoted, but the other type of message, as I mentioned, was when I get family members saying, my child is suffering. What can we do to help? And I've had messages from, and I've spoken with a number of formerly trans people who said, I was led astray. I was one of those people who was jumping on the bandwagon. And if anybody ever dared speak out against what we're doing, I would attack them just like, like I got attacked when I left, they're saying. And so these are real people's lives. And I see the cost. And anyone who can't imagine or can't understand that somebody at a young age, making these changes to their body hormonally or surgically that can't be reversed in many cases, it's distressing to see that not only that it's going on, but so many of my colleagues are callous to it, and they go, oh no, and they minimize it. Oh, the numbers are increasing. The reason it's increasing is more people are finding the courage to speak out and say, I was led astray. Okay. And one of the names I mentioned, Lisa Littman, I'm just throwing a bunch of things at people. But Lisa Littman, she was the one who coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. And she did a paper on that. And I'm going to make it very, very brief, but just when people think, how bad is this really? Well, here's how bad it is. Most teen girls, right, during puberty, just before, during, and after, go through a period of turmoil. Right, more than boys. What happens to girls as they transition into older girls and they develop, more than boys, they have to deal with curses that come along with societal curses, biological curses. Whereas boys, for most of us, it's almost a blessing in some ways. It's uncomfortable. We're trying to get used to it.
Yeah.
Right. But we're not getting all the special attention necessarily that girls are getting, that they're not mentally prepared for, or emotionally prepared for. So most girls go through a struggle during puberty, and all kids, or most kids, go through some struggle socially, not even about puberty, but wanting to belong to other people, wanting to feel like they are part of the group. I'll tell you right now, so many patients I've worked with, especially ones with addictions, when they trace back their childhood, and it can have something, it can be sexual orientation, it can be gender identity, or it can be anything else, even feeling that they don't belong to the same financial or socioeconomic strata as the others, okay? When they feel that they're not part of the group, that sense of not belonging, especially as a kid or a teen, especially as a teenager, that can be traumatizing. And I don't mean literally traumatizing, but it can definitely put you on a certain pathway in life. And so many people can trace their problems, their shame, their difficulty connecting with others to that period. So imagine so many people are going through that, and they try to work their way, they try to figure it out, see what's going on. And if you imagine, in Lisa Littman's study of rapid onset gender dysphoria of parents of kids who claimed suddenly out of the blue to be transgender, where they never said it before, which is not usually how transgenderism works, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know it from a young age. And I won't get into all of it, but the point is this: all these young girls who are struggling, so many of them are diagnosed or were diagnosed with serious mental health conditions, including autism. Like about a quarter of these kids, about 25% of these girls who suddenly said that they were transgender are autistic. Okay, 25% of the people, the population of autistic people is about, one, I forget, it's like 1 something percent, or less, depending on how broadly you use the term. But even the broadest of terms, you're not going to get any more than, I think, 3% at most. So 25% having autism, a large proportion of them having depression and anxiety, which predated their transgenderism. And a lot of them also having what's going to develop into borderline personality disorder, which is a disorder of instability of self, no sense of self, don't know who you are, can't handle your emotions, don't connect with others, and so on. So all of these people were struggling socially, trying to understand themselves. Oh, and a large proportion are also lesbian. So they're thinking, like, why am I having all these weird feelings? Why don't I like boys like all my friends do? All these different issues. And if someone tells them, well, we have the answer for you, it's being transgender, and if you join us, we're going to make your life so much better. We promise you. And all these kids in this study, I think almost all of them, all the family members who talked about these kids, almost all described the same pathway. These kids went onto websites, Reddit, there's a few different sites, and they found a community waiting for them and accepting of them. Yeah. And I'm glad that those communities exist. But those communities are also roping in a lot of people who aren't trans. So this is broadening. And many years ago, if you ask what percentage of teenagers identified as trans in America, the highest, it was like 0.3% is the highest. Sorry, 0.6%, I think, is the highest stat I ever saw. 0.6. Okay. Last year, it was about 2%. All right. So that's a huge increase. And, that, again, it's not insignificant. We've changed the structure of buildings to make them more accessible to people with physical disabilities, which we should do. Whatever percentage of people require the bathroom or the ramp or whatever else, we say this is enough, let's help them. So when we see at least 2%, and it's growing, of people who are going through the struggle who aren't transgender, some will be, many are not, that's not insignificant. We need to be dealing with this. And everyone who tries to deal with it gets shut down, like happened to Lisa Littman, Littman, if anyone wants to check her out. She's been giving more interviews recently, so people are going to hear more about her and realize she's not transphobic or hateful either. So anyway, that's just an example of why I think it's so important to fight out about this, because it starts small and then it grows and grows. And just a little side note here, if I can, I predicted this a few years ago. There's a social experiment happening, which is we've never in the history of our society told young children at 4, 5, 6 years old, hey, by the way, you think you're a boy, but you might really be a girl. We've never tried having teachers and the rest of the society saying that. And we don't, and I warned people years ago, I said this, I said, we have not had any controlled studies to see what could happen. What percentage of kids are going to say, okay, cool, that's not me, but if Bob feels that way, all the power to them. Okay, and what percentage of kids are going to go, could that be me, and get distressed over it? And in Ontario, there's a family that is suing the school board because their daughter, they're saying, is traumatized. At 6 years old, the teacher kept pushing this, saying, there's no such thing as boys and girls. You think you're a girl, you could be a boy, and the kid's traumatized. So this is going to happen more and more. It's one story, it's anecdotal, but they are taking them to court. And how many other kids are going to end up feeling that way? So why should we risk traumatizing a number of children to help a tiny percentage of kids who could be helped in a different way? We don't need to spread the word when kids aren't mentally capable of dealing with these things. They shouldn't be thinking about sex and sexuality at a young age. And again, this is coming from someone who was raised in a sex store. So I'm not a prude, right? I'm as liberal as you can get. I'm as freaky as you can get. So I'm not, my kids were were well educated as they were growing up, but at age, age appropriate levels. So
yeah,
anyway,
it seems to me like small children, sexual education only needs to be like what I had at that age, which was just stranger danger. It's just someone you don't know tries to touch you in your private places. Like that's all it seems to me small kids need to know about sex. And I can see how right from the small kids all the way through college students as well, that one issue, because you also don't want to dilute the trans population with non-trans people, because then the genuine trans people will even sort of lose their place. And it seems like small children could get pulled into it just because if you're not exceptional in any way, and a child realizes they can get attention for being trans, and they're just not that bright, not that talented, not that cute, they might say they're trans. Or I have actually seen in the world somebody who had identity issues, had a variety of major mental concerns, but didn't at all ever seem trans to me. They went to college, encountered a trans group that offered them community and support, and suddenly they were trans. And it's like with every other problem, if you have borderline personality disorder, or you're schizophrenic, or you have some other identity disorder, nobody's going to cheer you. There's no group, nobody sticks up for you. So if you're in one of those groups, I could imagine you forcing yourself to conform to trans just so you can have some belonging and support with your difficulties, because you don't need to be trans to have suicidal depression. And if you see that the trans kids are being well treated for their suicidal depression and you're being ignored because you're schizophrenic, I could imagine those people moving in, and it's not good for them. It's also not good for the genuine trans people, because you're diluting their support area with other people.
Right, exactly. And again, that's what I was saying earlier about this need to belong. We are social animals. So most people need to feel that I am part of a group. I have people who accept me and validate me. Now, you said also for people, and I agree with you, that if I'm not exceptional, because everyone is being told you're special, you're supposed to be special, etc., it is a way to get some social status. And one of my colleagues, by the way, when I said that, I forget how I phrased it, but I was talking about how it's quite clear, and the research shows this, that the kids, that being trans was or sorry, coming out as trans was the first time they felt accepted. And somebody wrote, one of my colleagues said, "Oh, come on, who would ever say they were trans just to be socially accepted, given how much struggle there is with trans people?" And I was like, this person has not kept abreast. We know that in high schools these days, being trans is one of the cool things to do, which is why more and more kids are identifying as such. And a few things about that. One, I want to be very clear. Someone who is truly transgender, it is a struggle. You are dealing with serious, dysphoria, or not being accepted and so on, and worrying about your family and stuff like that. That's very different than some kid who, says they're trans for other reasons. So I'm not minimizing the struggle. That's why you're saying as well that let's not glorify it. Let's not dilute the actual trans population with hangers-on, wannabes, confused people, right? And by the way, the second thing I was going to say was, well, first of all, transgender, the term transgender means almost nothing these days. I just saw a video yesterday, because I'm immersed in this, where they were trying to help kids. It was basically, it seemed like a recruitment video for trans kids, all right? And they basically conflated in that video the words transgender, transsexual, transvestite, all right, crossdresser. These are all different terms. And in science, we need precision. We can't deal with every issue with the same tool. We need different tools for different issues. And if we just broaden it all and say trans, we're not helping people. So the ease with which they were conflating this was very concerning. And then the only thing that has lost its meaning more than transgender, and now people are writing articles about this, and my colleagues are laughing about it, not truly laughing, but almost sadly laughing, saying the word queer, it has lost its meaning, right? What does queer mean anymore? I was glad when gays and lesbians, appropriated and said, we're taking it back. We're going to use the word queer. You can't use that as an insult. This is our word. We're going to use it to empower ourselves. I was like, good for you. All the power to you, right? But today, queer, it really means nothing. And, and a lot of gay, lesbians, anyone who belonged to the LGBTQ, etc. Rainbow, they're upset because it's like, this was part of our identity, and now it means nothing. And I'll just take it one more. I'm just going to, but if anyone, I don't know what you're going to call this, but if you say how to deal with mental health issues in isolation during COVID, people are going to go false advertising. So we might have to.
Or perhaps we could even cut this in half into two and label them each appropriately, so that this one will be on transgender issues.
Hey, why don't we do that? Yeah, okay. And yeah. I'll be happy to do then the COVID part right afterwards. Okay, so okay. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
If anyone at this point's wondering why I had the opinions that I did about not wanting to glorify the trans population. So I'm a straight white, I'm cis, so I'm not a part of that community, but I was thinking of it from my perspective, being bipolar and being strongly bipolar is, I would not want bipolar to become what transgender is, where it's trendy, where people with different conditions are trying to fit bipolar. And again, not because I want everyone to get the right support. And here at the channel, if there's someone transgender listening, I'm good at talking to people dealing with suicidal issues, and I do support sessions with community members. I'm happy to help any transgender person if I can. I don't understand the dysphoria, but I understand all sorts of other aspects from my bipolar. But yeah, being bipolar, I wouldn't want it diluted the way transgender's been diluted, and I wouldn't want the issue confused. Because someone with borderline personality disorder needs a different training or different therapy and different understanding.
Right, and coming from someone whose father was seriously bipolar as well, until he had 90 or 85% of his thyroid taken out. So he lives his whole life with bipolar disorder, serious bipolar disorder. So he feels the same way as you do, but not only just diluting it, but it became trendy. Like someone like Ben Stiller at one point years ago said, "Oh, I'm bipolar," because and it's insulting. And for a while, just so you know, it did. I'm bad with time and chronology, but I'm going to say between 5 and 10 years ago, it became a bit trendy for people starting to say, I'm bipolar. And it's just insulting to someone who has bipolar disorder, as you know.
I had heard Douglas Murray refer to the same thing once. I was not plugged into the world at all when bipolar was trendy, but I've heard people reference that, or sort of that it became that just a person who was feeling a bit scattered would say, oh, I'm feeling bipolar today. So I never saw that actually happen, but I've heard some people say it did to a certain degree. And yeah, I wouldn't want, as someone bipolar, I wouldn't want that to come back and catch on. Right. However, it's always that balance, because on the other hand, I am working to try to make it okay to be bipolar. And I'm also taking words back. Like, I just refer to myself as the lunatic. My regular, when I go live, it's called Lunatic Live. And I'm happy to use every word like madman and all of that, because to me, it's, hey, there's nothing wrong with being insane if you're insane. Right. Just work on being the best, whatever it is you are. If you're transgender, be the best transgender you can be. If you're schizophrenic, be the best schizophrenic you can be. So it can be a hard line to tread, because you don't want anyone feeling ashamed, like about being schizophrenic or transgender, but you also don't want to glorify it.
Well, there's a few interesting things. One, I tell this to my class, and I used to not have to do this, but now on the first day of class, I have to say, I will use the word crazy dozens of times within the class. And I see some students kind of twitch, and I'll say to them afterward, I'll say, look, I just, for the same thing that you said, I said, I teach my kids, and I help embolden my patients to be able to say, use whatever words you want to use. That's not going to define me, and it's not going to hurt me. They're just words. And, you know, so my kids as well, we use language that, because I want my kids, I say, they're going to hear a lot worse, and I want you to just let it bounce off of you. And so I tell my students, I never had to do it before, but now I have to tell them, I use crazy. I'll say it with my patients. I'll say, you're crazy. But I'll say, I'm crazy. Like, it's because I want it to hear enough times, and it means nothing. It's not, it doesn't have that sting anymore. So I agree. I'm glad that you're doing that as well. We have to make people more resilient to, you know, just these kind of words. And it's not to downplay it. If I see someone using crazy in an insulting way, I'm not going to go, it's not insulting. I'll say, it's wrong. Don't, you know, it's not nice to say that. But I also want the person who's being called crazy to go, bullets bouncing off of me. It means nothing. So, and then the second thing was, the thing about the bipolar, no, sorry, yes, the stigma, where we don't want people to feel stigmatized for having a mental health issue. The funniest, most ironic thing about my fights with many trans people, and by the way, I'm not gonna have time to get into it, I don't think. Maybe we will now that we have a separate episode, but there's different types of trans people, and certain types are perfectly fine with me. They encourage me. They say, everything you're saying is true. It's my experience, or I know people like that. It's only a certain type. They are the most vocal, and they are the ones who try to shut people down the most. All right. And they are the ones, whenever I talk about, you know, gender dysphoria being a mental health issue, they get all angry and everything. I say, do you know how insulting that is to everyone else who has a mental health issue? Like, you don't know how insulting you're being. It's terrible. So what's wrong with having a mental health issue? There are problems with it, and we want to help you deal with it, but it's not a shame, or shouldn't be a shame, to have this condition. We should encourage people to be able to speak about it, and to, as you say, to be the best that you can be, whatever issues you're dealing with.
Because with all of these labels, I think while they're all conditions that can be extremely difficult, they're also conditions that when a person masters it, they become precious to society, not despite their condition, but because of it. There are so many mad geniuses that it's not that they were able to figure out the formula despite the fact that they were crazy. It's because they were crazy. They were hearing it from God or an angel. They were like Cantor is a great example. He developed all the infinity mathematics, which are still what we're using, and he was in and out of a mental hospital, like just going back and forth. And so I think sometimes the way we talk about mental health even devalues the value of it. Because I think personally, I feel there's an evolutionary purpose to these mental issues, and that it's to create unique individuals for whether it was from the shamans to the artists to certain scientists who benefit from that. Mental illnesses can be dangerous blessings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny.
If treated properly.
Right. And my father, just so you know, like, I was, for the record, he's an artist, and that's why it was hard. He was misdiagnosed for so many years, or not diagnosed, because everything he was doing was, well, what a crazy artist is supposed to do. He's old school artist, and and he was a genius, or is a genius, But he always says, he goes, when people talk about their mental illness as a blessing, he gets so angry because for him personally, he said it's a curse. He wishes he never had it. So, you know, everyone has a different perspective on it. So anyway, it's everyone has different perspectives. And the only way, you said it earlier about like if someone has borderline personality, it is a very different condition to deal with than bipolar disorder. And it's funny that you chose that. I don't know if you chose that because you've experienced with this, but one of the most common misdiagnoses I see all the time, mostly with family doctors, is someone who actually has borderline personality getting misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder. And those are two very different things, and they should never be misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
You know.
I found because I've done over the years a lot of work, sort of peer counseling, I guess you'd call it. And I found people with borderline personality disorder seem to be the ones who have to go through the most diagnoses until they find it. It seems they're often diagnosed with one thing, then another, then another, then another, until it comes back around to that.
Right. And I'll tell you, when we talk about stigma, I just was teaching this last week to my class. And again, we're going to be tangential, but I think it's important for people to understand why it's so important, A, to reduce stigma, and B, to have precision when it comes to science and medicine or mental health. That unfortunately, people with borderline personality disorder, once they get that label, they are the most rejected when it comes to, you know, to mental health care. That if someone, and I used, you know, and I've had so many students, because I've got a lot of students with borderline personality disorder or traits, and they've always come up to me afterward and they go, thank you so much, because that was my experience. What you just described about this patient or that patient, they go, I went through that too. So I don't just make up stories randomly. Like I choose stories that I know are real, and I hope that other people who've gone through them can feel a bit validated, like, oh, it wasn't just me, it wasn't because of who I am, it's because of someone's ignorance or hate or bigotry that, you know, that led them to treat me that way. So in any event, that's just why it's so important not to be politically correct, but to look at reality. And it doesn't mean we have to be jerks. I'm not saying to just, you know, to use, people like to use that as an excuse sometimes. They just say, oh, I'm just an honest person. Nah, you're tactful and you like to hurt people, you know, in some cases. But that's not my motive. My motive is to help people. And like I said, as we've said a few times, you can't help if you don't know what you're actually dealing with. And you can't know what you're dealing with unless you're able to have an honest discussion, examination, and you know, working together in collaboration to find out what the heck is going on with these different conditions. So anyway, that's maybe that would be a good place to stop the trans part and you know, move over to the other topic. That's up to you.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was just thinking as you were wrapping up there.